Welcome everyone. Glad to see you on my channel. Today I will tell you about an unusual story, an amazing story about companionship and love. I wish you a pleasant audience. Alice ran around the hall like a madwoman, following the orders of the senior manager along with the other women. Though she was only a dishwasher in this restaurant, but today was a special day, the meeting of important guests, and all staff was involved in decorating and serving the hall. After all, the most influential and wealthy businessman of the city and his deputy were coming to dinner. Everyone knew that Adam was a former criminal authority and had a very strong temper. He was feared by everyone. The deputy, Oliver, was an upstart, young and precocious. He did not put people down at all. He could be easily impudent, and he even had the look as if he considered everyone around him inferior to him. In general, the guests were those guests, the director of the restaurant for the 1000th time. He told everyone to just nod and smile and comply with any, even the most ridiculous requests of important visitors. He wanted to show that his restaurant is the most prestigious and the service is at the highest level, as well as the menu. Alice was just running past the back door when she saw a boy she knew in the window. He was looking at her pleadingly, waiting for her, as usual, to let him warm up and feed him. It was cold outside with a strong wind, and the little boy was very cold. He was strong wind, and the little boy was very cold. He was shaking from the cracking frost. Now, of course, was not a good time, but the girl's heart ached. She imagined Stanley freezing and hungry. There was no one else to help him. She looked around. No one seemed to be around and quietly turned the key in the lock. She gestured for him to follow her. She sat him down on sacks of flour in the back and brought him a plate of potatoes and a chop. Next to it, she put a cup of hot tea and a fresh, crispy bun. She spoke quickly. "Stanley, when you've eaten, go away at once, but quietly. Don't let anybody see you. Adam's coming to the restaurant tonight, and there's a lot of excitement. You better not show your face around here too much. Wait for me in the park. I'll bring you some food after my shift. Lots of delicacies. That's it, my good man. I'm off. I'm gonna get scolded." She patted the boy on the long, uncut hair and ran on, for from the hall was already heard. "Alice, where have you been? You're the only one to be sent for death. You fell asleep in the kitchen, didn't you? I don't have a lot of time." The girl had been working in the restaurant for a year. All that time she'd been secretly feeding Stanley. The boy was only 9 years old. It was not the first time he had run away from the orphanage and hung around cafes and restaurants, asking for alms. Alice felt awful pity for the boy. His mother was an alcoholic. His stepfather beat him till he was bruised, so they took him out of the family. And the orphanage was no picnic either. The kid told me how he got caught in the storeroom, was bullied, and was forced to drink bad alcohol to make a fool out of himself. Then he vomited for 3 days, almost died. He was badly poisoned. He spent the night on a heating main with some homeless people. They smelled bad, but they didn't hurt him, so he ran away. Alice would have adopted him long ago and taken him to her place. She really stuck by her soul to the kid, but nowhere. She herself lived in a small rented room, and the landlady was so mean that she came to check on her several times a month, thinking that the young girl would take her husbands there. So Alice fed Stanley. She let him in the back room quietly, let him eat and get warm. And once a week she let him go to her house for a swim and a good night's sleep. She often bought him clothes and shoes. After all, it was the beginning of winter, and the boy had neither shoes nor a warm jacket. Finally, the big guests arrived. A cortege of expensive cars lined up outside the restaurant. Waiters ran and bustled about like crazy, serving the rich. The latter lounged imposingly, leisurely drank, and snacked on delicacies. Alice had no time to cope with the piles of dishes. 2 dishwashers were running, and she still washed by hand. The steam was terrible. Suddenly she heard a terrible commotion in the hall, shouting, cursing in Stanley's familiar voice. "It wasn't me. I didn't steal anything. Let me go, please." Alice's heart sank in her heels. She dropped the beautiful salad bowl to the floor and looked out into the hall. All the waiters were standing in front of the guests, emptying their bags and pockets. Stanley was being held by the ear, at the risk of tearing it off altogether. He was howling in pain and crying. Alice, unaware of herself, ran up to the boy and held him to herself, asking the important man, "What happened? Why are you hurting him?" "It is just a poor, hungry boy. He is not a thief. I know for a fact. Let go. He is only a child." The man looked at her contemptuously, as if she were nothing, and shouted, "My purse was missing, and in it there was something very important to me, besides money and business cards. Everybody saw that homeless guy hanging around at the beginning of the evening. Maybe he stole it. And who are you, and why are you sticking up for a beggar?" Alice blushed and babbled, "I am Alice. I've been working here as a dishwasher for a year. Do not touch the boy. He would never take someone else's." And she pushed the baby, whispering to him, "Run away, or we'll both be in trouble." There was no need to repeat it twice, and Stanley was blown out of the restaurant in a second. But Alice got the worst of it. They scolded her, shook all her things, and threw her out with a wolf's ticket for nothing. The director yelled so much that it made my veins swell. "What are you doing here, you trash?" "A shelter for the homeless." "Who are you anyway? I don't want to see you here again. You're a disgrace to the whole world. Who's that ragamuffin to you? Come on, confess. It was you and him who did it, wasn't it?" Alice cried and swore, "Nobody. Just a poor, hungry kid. Do you have children? I just feel sorry for him. He's not a thief. I didn't do anything. Don't throw me out, please. My father is sick. I need the money." But the director was adamant. He needed this sacrifice for show, to smooth over and hide the unpleasant scandal with the disappearance of the purse. Alice cried and walked home, not noticing neither the cold nor the piercing wind. Suddenly Stanley ran up to meet her. He looked into her eyes and begged, "Alice, I didn't take anything. Honestly, you want me to swear on my health. Do you believe me? I'm not some thief. I'm an idiot for not listening to you. I really should have stayed away, but I thought, on the contrary, the rich people would take pity, give a good alms. And here it is." Alice only waved a hand and said through sobs, "What difference does it make now? I'm already unemployed. They kicked me out, Stanley. That's the way it is. I know you're not a thief, but it doesn't make any difference." When Alice got home, she collapsed on her dallion and wept all over again. She began to remember her whole life. Alice grew up in a village. Her mother was an ordinary milkmaid, her father a combine operator. Everything was like everyone else. A vegetable garden at home, a farm, an ordinary village life. Elisa grew up quiet, calm, helped her parents. Except that she had a very keen sense of justice. She could not stand lies and deceit. Hard work, early waking up and weeding a huge vegetable garden for many years of life severely undermined her mother's health. And her father often liked to drink, and scandals were not uncommon in the house. But in the village it is the norm. No one pays attention to such things. The poor woman suffered a lot, and when Alice was 14 years old, her mother died, right in the garden, a stroke. The girl grieved so much, sobbed so much, blamed her father for not helping them enough and ruining her life. After his wife's death, the man withdrew into himself, but he began to drink more than ever. He tried to drown out the terrible pain in his soul and his guilt. He crawled home almost on all fours. Alice had to Oliver Cavate his clothes and persuade him not to rage and go to bed. And in the morning, the father was black as a cloud and demanded to give him money for another bottle again. My daughter wouldn't give it to him. She hid it, and they argued about it. She begged her father to stop, pleaded, told him how bad and difficult it was for her alone. But it was as if he did not hear her. And 6 months later, he had a drunken accident, hitting a grain truck on a country road with a combine harvester. Alan was confined to a wheelchair forever. Only now did he realize the full extent of what he had done, what he had condemned himself and his minor daughter to. Alice had grown by 10 years during that terrible year. Her father, of course, she did not leave. She got up at dawn and dawn, managed the garden and the household, then took care of her father and ran off to school. She just fell asleep at her desk during classes. Teachers took pity on the poor girl, realizing what a heavy burden was dumped on her. But Alice's father never forgave her. She spoke coldly and through the teeth, not looking into her eyes. She sincerely believed that if he had not drunk, all this horror would not have happened. Right after graduation, Alice decided to go to the city to work. Her father needed an operation, otherwise the doctors in the village said that he could completely fall ill and not get out of bed, and where to get money from. So Alice asked Aunt Diana to look after her father, and she went to the capital to earn money. It is clear that the young girl without education and experience is not taken anywhere. So it is a miracle she managed to get a job in a restaurant dishwasher. The work was very hard, on her feet 12 hours a day, but the pay was generous. She was not offended. Alice rented a room on the outskirts, small but clean. The landlady was unbearable. She tried to control everything. A few months passed. Alice saved most of her salary for her father's surgery. She left only the bare minimum to live on. It must be said that the girl had an unconventional appearance. Beautiful, deep brown, oriental eyes with long, curled eyelashes, dark skin, and a chic, long mop of hair to her waist. Almost all men turned after the beauty and drooled. One day, on a day off, Alice was walking in the park, and some reckless driver turned around in a steep car, right on the sidewalk, almost ran over a young girl. She became indignant and jumped aside, frightened and bewildered. A young major jumped out of the car too and began to make excuses. "Girl, I'm sorry, for God's sake. Daddy recently gave the car. No driving experience yet. Let me buy you a coffee. Here, not far away, there is a good place." Alice looked at the stranger. Good-looking her age, well-built, and agreed. So she and Norman began a stormy romance. Naive Alice fell in love, forgetting about everything in the world. Restaurants, armfuls of flowers, and hot nights completely turned her head. She took offense when his fiancée disappeared, then appeared again. But she forgave him absolutely everything. Trite as it may seem, a couple of months later Alice became pregnant. Naive girl immediately happy to tell Norman. He raced over 10 minutes later at their favorite spot in the square, where they met, and shouted angrily, "What are you, stupid? Couldn't you be more careful? There are a lot of pills for all this. Here's the deal. Here's your money for an abortion, and we'll forget all about it." Alice was crying. "Norman, why are you doing this? I love you." He laughed right in her face. "Who do you think you are? I'm the prosecutor's son. Who are you? You're just a pretty dishwasher. I'll be laughed at by everybody. You just relaxed and had a little fun. That's all. That's enough money for your stomach and erase my number, okay?" And he left without even saying goodbye. And Alice sobbed on the bench until the night, unable to move from their seats. My soul was so disgusting and nasty. It was as if she was trampled and thrown on the garbage dump. She was angry. How could he do such a thing? The bastard. And I am good, stupid country girl. I thought I was a princess. And now what to do? I might as well hang myself. I fell in love like an idiot, and the girls at the restaurant warned me. You're not a couple. Not a couple. Not equal to him. On nerves, Alice miscarried a week later. From the hospital she walked like a robot. Something inside her died, broke off, and she didn't care what was going on around her. She swore to herself that she would lock her heart 100 times and never let anyone else hurt her. The only person she felt tender and warm feelings for was Stanley. She felt madly sorry for the poor hungry boy. He reached out to her, looked into her eyes, and that look turned everything in her soul. After she was fired, Alice began to frantically look for a new job. But so far, no suitable vacancies with the salary she needed came up. The girl was beginning to panic. The rent was due soon, the refrigerator was empty, and she had not set aside a penny for her father this month. One day the doorbell rang. Alice opened the door and froze on the threshold. In front of her was the same oligarch Adam, because of whom she was kicked out of the restaurant. Alice was scared out of her wits, swallowed, and huddled against the wall. If he found me at home, no good can come of it. But to her surprise, the man strode into the room, pushing Alice aside like a feather, sat down in a chair and said, "Alice, I beg your forgiveness. There has been an unfortunate misunderstanding. You really had nothing to do with stealing my purse in the restaurant, and neither did that boy." We later looked at the security footage in the dining room. Turns out it was my dodgy deputy who stole the wallet. Can you imagine that? I took him in, and it turns out he was working for a competitor. He's disgusting. I knew my wallet contained a valuable flash drive with information. I always carry it with me. So it all came out. I threw the scoundrel out like a dog. Now even a janitor cannot get a job. Alice whispered, "Yes, I believe it, that you know how. So what do you want from me? I do not understand." The man cleared his throat and replied, "I understand that it was because of me you were out of work, but I will not reinstate you in your position. It is not my rank, the owner of the city, in front of the director of the restaurant to beat bows. But I would like to offer you a position as a maid with a salary in my country mansion. You will be allocated a separate house on the territory. The pay is good. You won't be left short. So, are you in?" I do not twice such an offer. Alice knew that such a man cannot refuse. It will cost you more, and the work she really badly needed. No money at all, and she nodded. "When to start?" "I'll do it. I'll do it, but I only have one condition," the man replied smoothly. "Gather up. Let's go right now." "What's the holdup?" "Don't worry, I can buy any woman if I want to. Believe me, I do not need it. And you are good enough to be my daughter." So Alice started working at Oligarch Adam's house. He lived there with his son Alvin. The guy was incredibly attractive, charismatic, pumped up. Couldn't take your eyes off him. But his demeanor, however, was not to anyone's liking. Typical high-flown big shot. He liked to party till morning, gambled at the casino, and squandered his father's fortune. Technically, Alvin was listed as the lead senior manager at Adam's firm, but in fact, he barely ever went there, only his paycheck. Adam, of course, was very upset by his son's antics, tried to talk sense into him, but all was in vain. Alice liked her job, though it was a little hard to get used to. The house was huge. But within a month she was fully absorbed and coped very well with her duties. Stanley was not forgotten by Alice. On weekends, she brought him lots of food and things to the heating plant. She took him to her room, bathed him, and changed his clothes. The boy was always happily waiting for her, huddled close to her, and looked at her so much. That look was literally begging. "Take me away from here." Every time after such meetings, Alice cried for a long time out of despair. She wanted to hold Stanley to her and finally say those cherished and most important words. "I'm your mother, and I won't give you up to anyone else." One evening, Adam felt ill. His blood pressure spiked to 200. Angelina, the frightened cook, and Alice called an ambulance. The oligarch was given first aid, and they wrote how to take care of him. The women took turns being on duty at his bedside. Thank God by morning the crisis had passed. Just as Adam fell asleep, Alvin, tipsy from the club, burst into the mansion and began shouting, "Angelina, get the coffee, with cream." Alice went quietly to the guy and reproachfully asked, "Alvin, my father is sick. He had a seizure. He just fell asleep. Do not shout, please, and do not spoil your health with your behavior. Daddy is upset, isn't he?" The young major suddenly jumped up and stormed out. "Who are you to tell me what to do?" You're just a maid. So know your place. Go away and mine in silence, and I'll deal with my father on my own. Understand?" Alice blushed, shrunk her head, and said, "Sorry, it will not happen again," and ran off to her room. There she sobbed, and the guy, though often rude, but he looked at her so candidly, as if evaluating and examining. And now he was humiliating her so much, as if he slapped in the face. Alice was angry. Well, fuck him to hell. Let him continue to roll down if he likes to live so much. So I found a king. I will not say another word. I won't look in his direction. After a couple of days, Adam got better, but he still couldn't stay on his feet for long. So the millionaire instructed Alvin to drive the car to important negotiations in his place. The young man drove away and disappeared. 100 kilometers from their town, they found Alvin's car burned to the ground, but the body was never found. Adam was tearing and tearing. He hired the best detectives to find his son, but all in vain. A month passed. In Adam's mansion, the situation was heated to the limit. The oligarch was almost bedridden with worry for his son. All the time he took pills. His blood pressure was off the scale. Alice also became sad. She longed for this obnoxious and impertinent guy, scolded herself as much as the light of day. What a fool. The second time on the same rake. Forget him. You are not a couple with him. He doesn't even look at you. And you're howling after him at night. I can't get him out of my head and heart. Just remember him, that look with a squint, and my heart leaps out of my chest. One night, Alice had a strange dream. Alvin was sitting at the bottom of some hole and whispered cracked lips, "Help! Help! I'm in Adelaide." Alice woke up in a cold sweat. She was pounding. She turned on the light, drank water. Alvin, still standing before her eyes. So real was the dream. Alice opened a map on the internet. Indeed, such a village existed in reality, but very far from where they found Alvin's car. The girl barely waited until morning, and for Adam to come down to the kitchen for breakfast. She began to explain everything to him in a confused manner. "Adam, you've got to listen to me. I had a dream about Alvin today. He's alive, but he's in trouble. He's sitting in some hole in the village of Adelaide. I looked it up on the map. There is one. It's a long way from the road where Alvin's car was found, but still. What if it's a dream? Why don't we double? Check it." The man looked at her skeptically. "Alice, you're not a bad girl, but I think you've watched too many soap operas. I do not believe in any kind of a lucky dream. The best detectives in town are looking for Alvin. Do your job and do not fill my head with nonsense." Alice sighed and silently walked away, upset that the oligarch only laughed at her and did not believe a word. But the stubborn girl was not a dog to refuse the trip. She felt in her heart, Alvin is there. Alice developed a whole plan for the weekend. She packed a backpack with everything she needed: matches, a rope, a knife, a gas can, a blanket, some breadcrumbs, sandwiches, and drinking water. And she rushed to Stanley's house. She simply had no one else to turn to for help. "Stanley, baby, I need your help. Do you have a faithful friend, preferably older and stronger than you? One who doesn't ask you anything, just helps you out. I need to go to a place this weekend. A man, my master's son, is in trouble. I have to find out and help him." The boy answered businesslike, "I will do anything for you. I'll take Austin. He's 16, but he's as big as an ox and mute. So he ain't gonna tell nobody nothing. But I'm good with gestures, but he has to be paid. He won't go for nothing." Alice agreed, hired a cab. Since no bus would go to such a remote place, took the kids, and hit the road. She spent a huge sum on the cab, but that didn't stop her. Alice was possessed. For some reason, she firmly believed that it was there, in Adelaide, that she would find Alvin. It was a long, bumpy, and off-road ride, and finally the driver, scowling, dropped off the passengers and drove away at once. The three of them went in search of the young businessman. The boys were extremely excited. For them it was a real adventure, but Alice was very nervous and already blamed herself for dragging children into such a venture. After all, she herself did not know what awaited her, and here, and the children. Right in the field, some local kids were frolicking and throwing apples at each other. Stanley came up to them, talked businesslike, and then they shook hands. The boy happily informed Alice, "I know where to look. We are looking for an abandoned house on the outskirts, under the swamp. It looks like that's where we are." Alice was taken aback. "How did you get that information? How did you manage to get it? How did you get it?" Stanley laughed. "Well, I'm not used to it," said that we are looking for a folder, and the older brother is even numb with grief. He said they must have stolen it. I asked if they have not noticed strangers here in their village. Here they were sympathetic and said that on the outskirts, in an abandoned house, someone obviously lives. Sometimes a cool car comes, then leaves. And I think they heard some voices. Alice patted the baby on the head. "Well done, Stanley." "Thank you. I never would have thought of that." "Well, now let's go then." They walked for a long time through the village. Alice asked the local old ladies, just in case, where they lived district officer. It turned out even in the next larger village. Finally, when the street began to turn gray, they found the house they were looking for. The farmstead was quite large, surrounded by a high fence. No one could get close. Alice tried and tried and tried and tried. No way. The boards were carefully nailed to each other. Stanley, watching her agonize, grinned. Austin deftly threw the boy on his shoulder and over the fence, and in a couple of minutes, Stanley opened the gate on the other side and they entered the grounds. There were no cars or people in the yard, but still they were very quiet, just in case. The door of the house was locked with a large padlock. Stanley examined it busily and concluded there was certainly no one in the house. The lock was rusted and had not been used in a long time. "Let's move on. Maybe there's a barn or a basement." Local boys said they saw strangers at the back of the yard. "So let's go around and take a look." They went around the back of the house. Indeed, there were many outbuildings. Apparently some farmer used to live there. Alice and the boys looked one by one into each barn. And nothing. Total fiasco. Everyone was already tired, exhausted, and Alice sat down right on the bare bricks. "Oh, guys, I'm sorry. I should not have started all this, and somehow need to get home. There's no one here." Suddenly there was a very faint moaning sound coming from somewhere underground. Stanley put his finger to his lips. Everyone went silent, and he started screaming at the top of his lungs. "Are you there, Alvin? Answer me. We can't find you." Alice joined in. "Alvin. It's Alice, the maid. I want to save you." After a couple of minutes, indeed, the moaning intensified. Stanley ran to the last barn they had recently come out of, then gestured for the others. "Oh, man. What fools we are. There's a cellar under the hay. Austin, you better push, or I ain't strong enough." He gestured to the boy to tell him what they wanted him to do. The sturdy lad pushed on the heavy door to the cave, and it opened with a creak. It reeked of horrible stench and dampness. Alice sternly ordered Stanley and Austin, "I'm going in there alone. Wait here. You never know what's out there. I'm worried about you anyway. If I'm gone long enough, you run and find a policeman." The girl crossed her heart, exhaled, and began to descend the earthen steps with the lantern. When she finally found a level surface under her feet, she looked around and began to shine the light around. In the farthest corner, right on a pile of half-rotten hay, lay Alvin. He was tied with ropes to a pole. It was a terrible sight. He was unrecognizable. Skin and bones, black, dried out, haggard. Next to him was a water bottle with liquid at the bottom and dried mice, eaten breadcrumbs lying around. Alice even cried out in shock and reached into her backpack. She got water, and the first thing she did was go over to Alvin and try to get him drunk. The man was awake, then unconscious. He was burning up, with dry, cracked lips. He greedily drank a sip of water and begged, "Help! It's Oliver. It was Papa's deputy, and he stole me away just for revenge, to hurt my father. I don't know how much time had passed, and I didn't think they'd find me. I just prayed and waited for death to come for me." And the man lost consciousness again. Alice took out a knife and began to cut the ropes, then shouted to Stanley, "I found Alvin. He's unconscious. I need Austin to help me get him out. In the meantime, Stanley, run up to the neighbors and find out where the paramedic station is and how to get there." Austin went downstairs, and the two of them and Alice could barely get Alvin's body to the surface. The manhole was deep and narrow, and there was no way the three of them could make it. Meanwhile, Stanley had returned. He was out of breath and panting, and he was babbling. "There's no station here. There's only a handful of people here. But there's a healer, Claudia, at the other end of the village. They say everyone is treated by her, so have to drag your fiancé there." Alice blushed from head to toe. "He's not my fiancé, you say? Just the master's son, that's all." Stanley laughed. "I may be small, but I'm not a fool. Would you just save the master's son? You fell in love, just say so. All right, let's think how to carry him. And there's no blanket." Alvin was barely on his feet, and Alice and Austin, supporting him on both sides, had only just barely escorted him out of the abandoned manor house. They were in a hurry. What if the kidnappers show up? They would kill everyone. No one would be spared. Alice's heart grew cold at the thought. She wasn't afraid for herself, but she was scared shitless for Alvin and the children, almost to the point of fainting. With great difficulty, they made it to the outskirts of the village, found the witch doctor's cottage, and knocked. A small, hunched-over old woman came out on the porch and sternly asked, "Who are you? Where from? What happened?" Alice jabbered, "We're from the city. You see, I work as a maid. A month ago, my master's son, Alvin, was kidnapped and disappeared, and then I had a dream that he was alive and calling for help, and the name of the village of Adelaide spoke. So I asked the boys I knew to help and went looking for him. And I found him. Only Alvin's unconscious, delirious, all hot. He must have caught a cold in the damp ground. Will you help him? And to tell you the truth, we have nowhere to sleep. Will you shelter us? Don't drive us away, please. I'm so scared. What if the kidnappers come back and find us?" The old woman muttered, "Well, come on in, since you've fallen on my head. Take him to the bath. I'm going to heat him up and give him a bath, and then we'll see. Why didn't the father go and fetch his son? He must have had enough money." Alice lowered her head. "He did not believe me," laughed. "Decided that the dreams... It's nonsense. And I knew I'd find Alvin, and I believed, you know." Granny grinned. "I understand. Let me see your hand. It was love that brought you to him. He is your destiny. He won't die. Don't be afraid. You'll have another child for him. You'll see. So undress your knight, and I'll brew some herbs. And let your friends eat potatoes and sleep in the hall. You and I don't need any help here." Stanley and Austin fell asleep after supper. They were tired after all, and Alice and Claudia stayed up all night conjuring on Alvin. They gave him medicinal decoctions, steamed a broom, then moved into the house and took turns to change his vinegar compress. By morning, he seemed to feel a little better, and his fever had gone down. Early in the morning, Alice told Stanley to find a connection, for there was no internet and no connection at all. The boy was smart, too, and climbed a tall pine tree, and he managed to call Adam and tell him that Alice had found Alvin, and they were in the village of Adelaide at Grandma Clava's witch doctor, and the phone went off. Alvin was gradually getting better. He drank some chicken broth. The guy came to his senses and began to tell the details of his kidnapping. "I was on my way to a meeting on my dad's errand, and this sous vide came right across me. I braked sharply. What else could I do? I thought maybe there was a drunk, reckless driver. 3 thugs jumped out of the car, and before I knew it, they had pushed me into their car, gagged me, and blindfolded me so I couldn't see the road. I woke up in that cellar. This Krakow, my father's former deputy, was standing over me and smirking. He says, "You're my prisoner forever now. Your father behaved badly and threw me out like a dog. Now you'll pay for it. You'll sit there like a dog on a chain till I've had enough. And I'll enjoy it and watch from afar as your daddy twitches and fidgets. It's a heavenly delight to me." I had lost count of the days. They only fed me occasionally once a week. They threw breadcrumbs and stew in a jar and a few bottles of water in the pit. And that was it. You would not believe I rethought my whole life in that damn pit. I think I acted like a fool. I wasted my life for nothing. And I should have done something good to people, to tell my father for once how much I love him. Alice even felt sorry for him. Well, the main thing is that we found you, and you survived. Alvin grabbed her hand and squeezed it tightly. He cried, "Thank you, Alice, sweetheart. I am now your eternal debtor. And to the boys, and to you, Claudia, everyone who saved me. I don't know how to thank you all. I thought I was going to rot in that damn pit. I still can't believe it's over." And tears came to the boy's eyes. The girl blushed from head to toe. "I was just so worried about you for some reason. And I had a dream that you were alive and in Adelaide. I told your dad, but he didn't believe me. He thought I was making it up. So I asked the kids, the street kids, for help. They sure as hell wouldn't refuse. They got a good heart, a responsive heart. Stanley's like a son to me. I wish I could adopt him and raise him, so he wouldn't go hungry and wander the streets. I've had a soft spot for him since I worked in the restaurant. But who's going to give him to me? I don't have a place of my own. I'm not married. So I help him as much as I can. And I love him like a son. If it wasn't for the boys, I wouldn't have found you by myself. Stanley's the one who heard your faint moaning from under the ground. Oh, I think your father has come for us." The hum of a car was heard outside the yard. Alice looked out the window. She thought it was Adam, but there by the gate was that nasty deputy Oliver, and beside him 2 more thugs. The girl went pale and drew the curtain. She whispered to the old woman, "These are the kidnappers? They are looking for us. Don't give us away, Claudia. I beg you, hide somewhere." The old woman pointed to the attic, and Alice helped Alvin climb up there. Quick Stanley and Austin flew up in the blink of an eye. Everyone was quiet, sitting there like mice, trying not to make a sound. Alvin involuntarily pressed himself against Alice, and a huge wave of tenderness and warmth swept between them. Claudia came out and opened the gate. "Who are they? What do you want? What happened?" Krakow asked. "We're looking for people missing a guy. Young, skinny. He might have had other hitchhikers with him. Were they with you? Maybe they asked for help?" The old lady said, "No, I didn't see anybody. Go away. Strangers rarely come to us. It's a beggarly village. Neighbors only come for help if they're in trouble." But Oliver sensed that his grandmother was clearly not telling the truth. Well, there was nowhere else for Alvin to go. He was very sick. He would not go anywhere. So he brazenly shoved Granny aside and walked with one of the thugs into the house. He began to look into the halls, into the rooms. Nobody was there. And then, as luck would have it, Alvin sneezed. He clamped his hand over his mouth and held on as best he could, but it still came out noisy. One of the bandits woke up. "Who's up there?" and pointed his finger to the attic. Not a muscle flinched in Granny's face. The ghost, seeing how the face of the kidnapper stretched, she added, "I'm just kidding, the cat Muska. Loves to sit there with the kittens in the hay. Why?" Just Oliver wanted to get up and check as he heard the shout of his assistant, squealing brakes and gunfire outside the window. He realized that he was too late, and that Adam himself had come for his son, and now he was in trouble. Then Oliver decided to run away through the vegetable garden, ran out into the backyard, leaving his comrades behind. While everyone was in shock, Stanley opened the window of the attic and had the good idea to shoot at the fleeing Krakow a small pumpkin, which was stored there. The bandit fell like a pile of planks, and by the time he figured it out, Adam's guards and later the police had caught up with him. What a laugh. The boy apprehended the kidnapper. Adam, seeing his son alive and unharmed, rushed to hug him, tightly, fatherly, and whispered to him, "How glad I am that you are alive, my son." Lord, the skinny one relic. Then he hugged Alice so that her bones even crunched and shook her in a burst of emotion, like a rag doll. "Thank you, Alice. Thank you, dear. Forever I will not forget. And I was a cynic. I did not believe in your dreams. I waved my hand. I think the girl thinks God knows what. And you risked it, and after all went to look for Alvin. Good girl, my brave, brave girl." It was Stanley's turn next. The oligarch picked him up in his arms and shook his hand. "Thank you. You are a real man. Ask whatever you want with your friend." Stanley suddenly became sad and lowered his head. "I don't want money. I want Alice to be my mother. That's all I want. Help me. You can do anything, can't you? The whole town knows you and respects you. And give Austin some money. He's deaf and dumb. He won't speak anyway." Adam was amazed at the deep and mature desires of this little homeless boy. He quietly replied seriously, "I will try to help. Honestly. Well, everybody get in the cars and go home." Then he turned to Claudia and tried to slip her a wad of money. "Take this, Grandma. Thank you for sheltering, for helping Alvin, for curing him." The old woman cried out, "Take it away. Why are you sticking your papers to everyone? You can't buy everything, my dear man. What do I need money for? I get groceries once every 2 weeks. And how much do I need, an old woman? You better help those boys." I looked at the older boy. He wasn't deaf from birth. No one's taken care of him, but with an operation, he'll hear and understand. And I have not cured Alvin yet. You should see him to the doctor. He has a strong bronchitis. It will take a long time to heal. And take care of Alice. She loves your son so much. She went to the middle of nowhere. She risked her life. I'll give you money, you say. Have a nice day. Have a nice day. Good luck to you. And the old woman waved goodbye. All the way Adam thought about the words of the healer. She was right, after all. I've been chasing money all my life, dreaming of getting rich. And what for? I lost my son. He hasn't seen me for days and nights. He didn't even have any normal friends. I didn't even have any normal friends. I didn't let him communicate with ordinary guys. And what's better than the rich guys? All they could do was spend their parents' money and go to gambling joints and casinos. Take Stanley and Austin. Destiny's been broken since birth. No one wants them. They're hungry, cold. They should be bitter at the world, but they're not. Stanley and Austin were enjoying the hot tub. It was the most fun the boys had ever had. They were given clean, fancy clothes, and Angelina, the cook, gave them both haircuts. She had done it since she was a little girl. The boys immediately transformed themselves and looked prettier. Alice was happy. Finally, Stanley was not sleeping on a dangerous heating main, and she was safe for him. The girl helped Angelina quickly prepare a delicious dinner for the whole gang, and everyone sat down to eat. Alvin was still not feeling well, so Alice took his dinner to bed. The boy needed a long time to lie down and recover. She knocked on the room and quietly entered, holding a tray of steaming cheesecakes and jam and coffee. She took a seat next to the boy and began coaxing him. Alvin, you've got to eat. You're skinny enough as it is. You used to love cheesecakes. You could have had 5 at a time. Well, at least a couple. The guy smiled. Okay, just for you. And he gladly ate them all. And Alice sat and admired him, though thin and haggard, dark circles under his eyes, though sometimes harsh and abrupt, and still such a favorite. Alvin suddenly took her hand and said softly, Alice, you know what? Will you marry me? After everything that happened to me, I have a completely different outlook on life, you know. and you and Stanley are the closest thing I've got to a man. Of course, I'm no gift, I know. But I will love and cherish you and Stanley, and when we get married, we will officially adopt Stanley too. Is that okay? I'm just now realizing that all these glamorous bimbos are worthless, and you're a hot, beautiful, smart, amazing cook, and you love me. What is not the wife of an oligarch? Alice knew the main words Alvin never told her. The most cherished I love you, and still decided to agree. Such proposals do not make every day. After all, she loves him, strong and deep. The banker was very happy when he heard the news that Alvin and Alice wanted to marry and adopt Stanley. Such a daughter-in-law one could only dream of. The wedding was fancy, lots of important guests, reporters, and the press. Everyone was gossiping about how beautiful the couple was. Where on earth had Alvin found such an oriental beauty? They looked great together. She was so beautiful, attractive, and very happy. Alvin looked after her beautifully and never left her side. Norman couldn't stand it, walked over to the newlyweds, and looking into Alice's eyes, said, "Congratulations on the marriage." "Are you happy?" Alvin looked at Alice, perplexed. "Dear, you know Norman." "How?" Alice laughed and replied, "No, what are you? The young man is just mistaken, right?" Vitally felt so unpleasant and offended. He even felt a sting of jealousy. Alice was now so alluring and inaccessible at the same time. And yet he himself, with his own hands, had once destroyed his happiness, repulsed her, humiliated her, abandoned her knowing that she was expecting his child. And what was the result? He married a fat Alina who was 6 years older than him. Father's happy, but him, no love, no joy in his soul. In general, strangers with his wife. Norman was biting his elbows and gnashing his teeth all evening, watching the newlyweds having fun. But alas, there was nothing to be gained back. He looked at his obnoxious wife sitting next to him, looking like a big frog, and cringed. Alice and Alvin had sorted everything out with the orphanage too, having heard the last name Adam. There was no problem at all with Stanley's adoption. All the paperwork was ready in 2 weeks. The little guy was happy and content. He is now with his mom, Alice, and dad, Alvin. All the heat pipe buddies were desperately jealous of him in Austin. The deaf-mute kid had had 2 surgeries at the best clinic and was now hearing with a hearing aid and learning to talk. After he was discharged, Adam planned to keep the boy in his mansion, first as a handyman, and when he was older, he would make him a driver, put him in the guest house. Kid's a good kid, executive. What's he got to lose with the bums? Alice had not forgotten about her father. She told her husband and father-in-law about him. They understood everything without words and brought the man from the village. He was examined by the best neurosurgeon in the capital and operated. It's hard to believe, but as a result, the man got up from his wheelchair and started walking with a cane. The elderly man was almost on his knees, begging his daughter's forgiveness and thanking her. "Alice, my daughter, you forgive me for everything. I know, if it weren't for the cursed vodka, my life would have turned out differently. You never had a childhood either. But you are the best daughter, and in spite of everything, you helped me and didn't forget your father. Thank you, sweet." Alice hugged him and whispered, "Daddy, I still love you no matter what you are. Just do not drink more, I beg you." The man crossed himself. "Here's a cross for you. I quit a long time ago. A local woman, Nadia, kept courting me, so we kind of fell in love. So now I don't do anything." Life went on as usual. Alvin took up his mind, and now he was making up for lost time in business and went to work. Alice was only glad of that. She had already forgotten when he smelled of alcohol. The young woman was now the mistress of the mansion to the best of her ability. She looked after the house and garden and engaged in the upbringing of her son. Ashamed to say, but such a bright Stanley read with difficulty, and know how to count only money, and that if a little, Alice was patient but strict. She did not let him down. They also had a lot of catching up to do to go straight to 3rd grade in the fall. Sometimes Stanley could not stand the onslaught of tutors, His head was fuming, and he shouted, "Mom, you're torturing me. I'm going to run away to the heating duct again." Alice answered him seriously. "You're not a bum anymore, Stanley. You're my son. You're Adam. So let's get through this together, okay? I'm not holding you back. You can go if you want, but think about what's waiting for you out there. Are you so eager to sniff glue, eat garbage, and drink cheap vodka? You'll go down and die in some sewer in your 20s? Is that the future you want? Answer me. Why do you say that and hurt me?" The boy put his arms around Alice and whispered, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. Well, let's at least take a little break, okay?" Alice kissed him on the top of his head. "Now we're talking. Go run around the yard, warm up, and in half an hour you're back in action." Alvin and Stanley got along great too. They raced together like little kids on a skateboard and competed to see who could do the most push-ups off the floor. The man had changed a lot since his marriage. He finally got wise and settled down, stopped wandering around casinos and clubs with friends, and began to appreciate and respect the people near and dear to him. Adam was only happy about that, and mentally thanked Alice that she had found an approach to him, and her love for his son awakened in him such a change. In fact, in such a short period of time, Alice was able to do what his father had failed to do in all the years of Alvin's childhood. Alice blossomed from a skinny, like a cane, girl turned into a statuesque and stylish lady. The newlyweds began to think about having a child together, and Stanley wasn't against having a brother or sister, and why not? Now every night, Alice heard those cherished words from her husband, "I love you," and her heart fluttered. She was now sure it was mutual.